Hi, my name is Gina Singleton and I'm an attorney at Brennan, Manna & Diamond. With the advent of health reform over the past year, meaningful use has become even more important to physician practices. There will be incentives offered beginning this year, which is essentially a bonus offered to those practices that achieve meaningful use for their Medicare and Medicaid patients. It's extra money. And also beginning in 2015, you start being hit with penalties, meaning that the government payers will start taking money away from you if you haven't achieved meaningful use with your EMR implementation. The government created grants, which are monies that are pushed down to the states, and the states have what we call regional extension centers, and those centers use the grant money to provide support for physician practices as they implement EMR and try to achieve meaningful use. There are many places that EMR impacts a physician practice. From the legal side, it's important to remember there are always HIPAA concerns with EMR utilization, specifically with the security rules. That is the second set of rules. First we had the privacy rules, but now we have security rules also. And we're talking about security of information. Is the computer protected so that not everyone can access it? Are employees appropriately trained so they understand when they're allowed to access EMR? And this is really interesting because you run into times when employees may try to, what I call, fish for information because they're just curious, and we have to make sure that we lock down on people's natural curiosity about patients, especially if it's a well-known patient or someone that they know personally, and remind them that HIPAA is always watching out. And of course, HIPAA is important because in 2009 with the HITECH Act, there's some real teeth behind HIPAA. If you have a HIPAA violation, you could be looking at penalties up to $50,000 per violation or even jail time. So it's really important that practices understand how to protect patient information, because when it's an electronic format, it's a lot easier to send information and transmit it to parties that don't have the right to access that information. Outside of HIPAA, there are numerous other legal concerns involving EMR. From a legal perspective, you always have the issue of what information should be transmitted, and when you have EMR, it becomes easier to provide more information because it's electronic and it's easier to pass along to other people. So when you're responding to requests for information, practices need to make sure that they are only providing that information which is required to respond to the request or which is even appropriate to respond to the request. We also have issues with EMR from the standpoint that Medicare created what we call the Recovery Audit Contractor System, or RACS. RACS are contractors that Medicare has hired to go out as bounty hunters and find inappropriate documentation of medical charts. When they find that something has been documented correctly, they can then say that the provider needs to repay that money to the government. And of course, the RAC is being paid on a commission basis, so there are lots of incentives to find mistakes. Providers need to understand that they need to document appropriately when they have a patient visit, but they also need to understand that they have the right to appeal the RAC determinations and that the RACs are not correct 100% of the time, and it is worthwhile to invest in the time and resources to appeal those determinations.